All right, Rangers. Here's a quick review of what's going on for the upcoming quiz. Talking about ancient Greece and the three different civilizations that made up ancient Greece. Number one, we have the ancient Minoans that grew on the island of Crete, out in the middle of the Mediterranean. And the Minoans on Crete are named for their famous king Minos. Many of you may recognize Minos from the Theseus and the Minotaur story. Well, that is him. His civilization is famous for the royal palace that, if it was completely excavated, would be larger than 800 different rooms. We only have part of it uncovered, but what we can do from looking at it is we can look at many frescoes, is a painting of wet plaster, and when the color is added to it, it dries, it hardens like a crust. We know about a lot of the daily life of things that went on in the ancient Minoan society. One of the things we know is that women had a lot of rights and privileges in ancient Minoa. We also, from looking at these frescoes, we realize that the Minoans were traders, and they didn't have any defensive fortifications, walls, forts, or a navy, which lets us believe that as traders in the middle of the Mediterranean, they got along with pretty much everyone. That is until 1400 BC, when they were conquered by the second group that will join to form modern Greek culture, and that is the Mycenaeans. And my joke there is the Mycenaeans weren't so nice. The Mycenaeans were a warlike culture from the mainland. They lived in this city high on a hill overlooking a cliff that has a long looping road to get to them, and one main gate, the Lion's Mound gate here going into ancient Mycenae. A lot of people have heard of the Mycenaeans through the famous Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, about the war with Troy. It was King Agamemnon who launched the Greek warships to take on the fabled city of Troy. And there are two reasons for the war with Troy. Number one is the beautiful face of Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Helen was married to King Agamemnon's brother, King Menelaus of Sparta, but she fled with the Trojan prince Paris across the sea to Troy. Agamemnon wanted to get her back. The second, more probable reason, but not a good story, is over trading rights of the Black Sea. And the war is going to take 10 years. Eventually, the hero Odysseus, as we're told, builds the wooden horse. The Greeks are able to sneak into Troy and defeat the Trojans. Now, for many years, people thought this was just a great story when German mining engineer Heinrich Schliemann, while looking for mining areas to mine in Scandinavia, got snowed in, and he read a copy of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And he fell in love with the story, and he sold his mining operations and spent many years with his wife sailing the Mediterranean, proving the story of Troy was true. And then in 1870, 1871, he discovered what he thought was the fabled city of Troy. But upon dating the artifacts, he found that they were too young. So he kept digging, destroying a lot of artifacts in the process, and he found out that Troy was built and destroyed and rebuilt on itself 9 times, and at the 9th layer, he found Greek and Trojan weapons and amphoras, proving that the war did exist. He then went over to Mycenae, and here in this little circled area, he found King Agamemnon's death mask. But being gone for 10 years, the Mycenaeans were weakened, and they were then conquered by a group of invaders known as the Dorians. And the Dorians closed the door to learning. This is the Greek Dark Ages, where learning for the first time in human history didn't slow, but it actually stopped. and went in reverse. It is during for about 500 years or so this happens. Then in 750 BC, the poet Homer will write the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And this gives rise to the separate Greek city-states. The Greeks will have the same culture, speak the same language, eat the same food, but they will develop in around 150 so city-states. Each one of them acted as its own independent country. And the Greeks were expert sailors. Their geography was full of mountain and valley and mountain and valley, so they were more accustomed to trading over the sea. So they were in contact with a lot of people because it was easier to trade and travel to others than go overland in their same country. But the independent Greek city-states began to compete over resources, and there was a big rivalry amongst them. And it was like bitter, like old, like rivals, like from your old neighborhood, or your sports rivalries, your Duke Carolinas, your Montague Capulets, your Hatfield McCoy, your Steeler Ravens, France, Germany. They just don't like each other, and it led to a lot of wars amongst the Greek city-states. But because they lived on the coast, the Greeks became very skilled sailors, and they traveled all over the Mediterranean Sea, trading wine, olive oil, and marble, because for Greece to trade with Turkey and Crete and other places, they weren't out of sight of land for very long, so it gave them a sense of safety. And the Greeks spent much of their time, Greek culture, outdoors in the hot climate, talking and meeting with everybody in these city-states. And it's kind of like your neighborhood. While you may not know everyone, you know somebody who does. And so they were kind of like large families. And the centerpiece of each Greek city-state or polis is the Acropolis. It's the high part where there's a temple to the patron god or goddess of the city. There's food and water. And in times of danger, everyone runs up to the Acropolis, and there is the first of 3 city gates up there. On the second level, in the middle ground, where the middle class lived, is where the marketplace was, where the theater was, where the outdoor areas, where everybody, upper class from the top and lower class from the bottom, met and mingled. And each wing, like the Acropolis, the middle class, and the city going out to the farmland, each was surrounded by a large defensive wall for safety. Around 750, right as Homer is writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Greek population became so big because there was only so much land that they could farm. They began to spread themselves out around the Mediterranean, as far away as Spain, southern coast of France, Italy. They're beginning to move all over. And this is going to lead some problems. The early Greek city-states were governed by a series of governments. At first, they were ruled by a monarchy, a rule by one single individual. But every time there was a fight with another Greek city-state, the king would tell his nobles, the guys who could afford weapons and armor, come with me, let's go fight Thebes or Corinth or whoever. And after a while, these nobles said, no, you need us a lot more than we need you, and we want political representation. And so when they're given some power, some of the Greek city-states were ruled by an oligarchy, a rule by a rich and powerful few, like 5 to 10 guys. Well, eventually that good old boys club wasn't good enough because there were merchants and traders who had a lot of money or maybe a lot of land, and they wanted into the oligarchy. They wanted power. They were more wealthy and powerful than everybody else, so why should they not have a say in the political process? And so some of the governments in Greece were run by aristocracies, or ruled by a rich, powerful few, maybe 20 to 50. And while 20 to 50 isn't great, or 5 to 10 isn't great, it's more than 1. And little by little by little, more people are getting involved in the governing process. Finally, in Athens, we will get a rule by a democracy, where people choose and elect their leadership, like the election day we just had. And this is a very, very powerful thing, but it takes a long time to get there. And so where we're going to stop are the reformers, or the archons of ancient Athens. And over a long period of time, these are some city fathers that helped the growth of democracy make it to that point in Athens. Number one is an archon known as Draco. Think of Draco Malfoy, but in the good sense, where Draco codified laws. He made them equal for all people, for rich and poor. Unlike Hammurabi's, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, only if you were an aristocrat, his were open to everybody. Many years after Draco, we get to a guy named Solon. Solon freed people that were in a thing known as debt slavery. If you couldn't pay your bills, you would sell yourself into debt slavery until your bill was paid. Well, Solon stops that. He ends the practice of debt slavery. He frees those already in debt, and he redistributes land to peasants who needed it. Said, you need a place to work, you need a job, I'm going to take excess land and give it to you. He is followed up by the great Pisistratus. And Pisistratus is copied by world leaders as famous as Julius Caesar and Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the New Deal projects. There were a lot of people who were freed from debt slavery, didn't have a job. They wanted to work, they just didn't know how to do it. So Pisistratus created public works projects, things that everybody would enjoy. More fountains, more aqueducts, a larger, more secure defensive wall. And when you've got, nothing, at the end of the day, you level the ground, then at the end, you've got a wall 3 to 5 feet high. You see progress. You feel good about yourself. Money was taken from the treasury in Athens, and it was given to those workers as a salary. When those people who didn't have money in their pocket for a long time got paid, they went out and spent some of that money, and it regenerated revenue that the government could tax. So they got all of that money back. The people felt good about themselves. They were working, they had a job, they were making progress. It was a good thing. And this leads us to the Archon Cleisthenes, who creates the Council of 500. So every citizen had access to the assembly. He divided Athens down into 10 different neighborhoods or voting districts. 50 people from each district were selected to serve 1 year in the Athenian government. When their year was up, they went back to their normal job, and 50 more people were selected. You could not serve 2 times until everybody in your district had an opportunity. And slowly but surely, democracy comes to Athens. But first, we have to engage in a series of wars known as the famous Persian Wars. All right, hope you guys listen to this, hope you watch it, and do well on that quiz, Rangers.